This is part one of a video series aimed at exploring the origins of Haplogroup G, as well as the development of subhaplogroup M406. Most scientists agree that the first modern humans emerged in the continent of Africa. They lived in small family groups of hunter-gatherers that migrated over time, likely to follow game and avoid competition in a gradually changing environment. The Awash River Valley in Ethiopia was likely an advantageous homeland for many of these groups, particularly the descendants of a man who probably lived in this area around 86,000 BC. This man was the unknowing progenitor of haplogroup CT. Since he is the ancestor of almost all men outside of Africa, this man is known as Eurasian Adam. As new births swelled their numbers, groups of hunter-gatherers would often divide in order to prevent the kind of discord that typically emerges in large foraging populations. One group would remain and the other group would move on to unclaimed territory. This occurred around 67,000 BC when two distinct lineages emerged, haplogroup DE and later haplogroup CF. About 63,000 BC, about 1,000 of the descendants of Eurasian Adam crossed the Red Sea at the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb into the Arabian Peninsula. It may not have been all at the exact same time. According to Y-Full, it was about 63,000 BC that DE split into haplogroup E, who stayed in Africa, and haplogroup D, who was probably the first group to cross the Red Sea. The members of haplogroup C and F also seem to have separated around this exact same time, and they would have migrated soon after. It seems that from the very start, human beings have always moved on in search of better living conditions, food, space, and relative safety. Scientists estimate that lower sea levels due to the onset of the Ice Age would have meant that the gap between the continents was only about 8 miles, which these groups somehow managed to cross. They found the lands of modern-day Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia to be a much wetter place than it is today, with game, plant life, and fresh water. So around 60,000 BC, bands of haplogroups D, C, and F populate the southern basin of the Arabian Peninsula along now-vanished rivers. By 45,000 BC, each succeeding group had begun to follow the southern coast of Arabia and trekked across the valley that will someday become the Persian Gulf. From there, haplogroup C and D would spread far to the north, into the heart of Central Asia, and eventually Europe, as well as continue along the coast into India, South Asia, and a far less submerged East Indies and Australia. Also around 45,000 BC, haplogroup GHIJK breaks onto the scene in the Arabian Peninsula. This haplogroup distinguishes the groups of hunter-gatherers that moved on to find new hunting grounds apart from their haplogroup F cousins. Now, some scholars feel that this split occurred in what is today the Persian Gulf. Would seem logical considering all the other haplogroups that were founded there. However, geography, time, and climate also make it possible that this group may have traveled north along the western coast of the Red Sea. This coast is known as Tiamat today and has several unforgiving regions now, but like much of the Arabian Peninsula, its past can be misleading. If the hunter-gatherers of GHIJK did in fact travel north along the Red Sea coast, it is certainly probable that several family groups discovered the Wadi al-Ruma and traveled east along its shores. Like the rivers in southern Arabia, the Wadi al-Ruma is a seasonal river today, but in Paleolithic times, it was a bountiful river that flowed 650 miles until it met up with the Tigris River, flowing through the valley that would eventually become the Persian Gulf. The term Gulf Oasis refers to this valley where several rivers of the Arabian Peninsula, Mesopotamia, and Iranian Plateau flowed. Many scientists have proposed that this area was a vitally significant zone for populations residing in Southwest Asia during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. When the surrounding areas grew hostile, populations would retreat to this area to exploit its freshwater springs and rivers. When the environment elsewhere was more suitable, groups would have migrated to follow game and resources. The safety net of the Gulf Oasis would have allowed for the most successful incubator of humanity outside of Africa. Haplogroup H formed about 46,500 BC, the same with haplogroup IJK. Haplogroup IJ formed 45,200 BC. Haplogroup K, 45,000 BC. Haplogroups K1 and K2, 43,000 BC. Haplogroups M and P, 42,000 BC. Haplogroups L, J, and T, 41,000 BC. Haplogroup I, about 40,000 BC. To me, that seems like a massive explosion of success. It is hard to ignore the comparisons of the Gulf Oasis to Eden, the biblical place where, as legend says, God not only created mankind, but where the proverbial apple of knowledge was first spilled. Eden is famous for its three major rivers coming together, which is very similar to what the Gulf Oasis would have looked like before modern times. In addition to Eden, the flood myth of Gilgamesh and the Babylonians, along with Moses of the Israelites, may harken back to when the waters of the Indian Ocean came crashing into the Gulf Valley around 11,000 BC, forging a new body of water and erasing what may have been the earliest settlements outside of Africa. But amongst all this talk of Eden and the success of its sister group GHIJK, Haplogroup G seems to have been left out in the sun. G may have continued along the coast of the Red Sea, with several small groups eventually reaching the fruitful land of the Levant. This will not prove to be the last time that the G tribe and its ancestors seemingly followed their own path, yet perhaps an alternative route would prove to lead to much greater success later on.